On my wedding day, the rows reserved for my family were empty enough to hear a pin drop. My mother simply texted that they would celebrate later because my brother had booked a trip to Hawaii, but that was not the worst part. Months later, when they needed me to save face, I smiled and said, "Not this time." The truth I finally revealed left my entire family unable to speak. My name is Brianna Hale, and for 34 years, I convinced myself that if I just performed perfectly enough, I would eventually earn my place in the family hierarchy. I live in Portland, where the gray skies usually comfort me, working as a campaign manager for Northline Creative Systems. My job is entirely remote, which means I spend my days organizing chaos, managing expectations, and ensuring that every deliverable hits its target with military precision. I am good at logistics. I am good at predicting human behavior. Yet, when it came to the most important day of my life, I failed to predict that my own mother would trade my wedding for a discounted hotel room in Waikiki. I had chosen a lavender farm near Dundee Hills, Oregon, for the ceremony. It was not a random choice. The rolling purple fields and the scent of earth and blooms marked the exact location where Ethan and I had our first real date. We picked the date to match our anniversary. It was sentimental, yes, but it was also locked in stone. We had put down deposits 6 months in advance. We had friends flying in from the East Coast. We had a caterer who had already finalized the menu. In the beginning, my mother, Marjorie, acted the part of the ecstatic mother of the bride perfectly. She requested video calls 3 times a week. We spent hours discussing the difference between ivory and champagne silk for my dress. She had opinions on the floral arrangements, insisting that lilies were bad luck and that we absolutely needed hydrangeas. It felt real. For a few weeks, it felt like I was finally the daughter she wanted to look at. Then came the shift. I know the tone of her voice better than I know my own heartbeat. It is a specific kind of hesitation, a high-pitched, airy pause that always precedes a request that benefits my brother. Logan. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was finalizing a budget report for Northline when her face popped up on my screen. She was not smiling. She looked like she was bracing herself for a burden I was about to place on her. She told me that Logan had found a deal. Logan is 29, 5 years younger than me, and has never been told no in his entire life. He works sporadically, usually in sales jobs that he quits after 3 months because the manager does not appreciate his vision. He had found a travel package to Hawaii. 7 days, all-inclusive, flights included. The discount was massive, something like 60% off, but the blackout dates were strict. The dates, of course, overlapped exactly with my wedding weekend. I remember laughing at first. It was a reflexive sound, assuming this was a joke or a minor scheduling conflict that they would obviously resolve by not going. I told her that was a shame, but maybe he could find another deal later in the year. My mother did not laugh. She sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a woman who believes she carries the weight of the world. She told me that Logan had been under so much stress lately. She said he needed a reset. She said the deal was non-refundable and that he had already put the money down on his credit card. Then came the question. She asked if I was absolutely married to that specific weekend in June. I felt the blood drain from my face. I explained, calmly, that the venue was paid for. The vendors were booked. People had bought plane tickets. This was not a dinner reservation I could just slide to the following Friday. That was when the weaponization of history began. Marjorie launched into the speech I had memorized since childhood. She talked about how hard she had worked to raise us. She talked about the sacrifices she made, the double shifts she worked when we were kids, the things she went without. She painted a picture of herself as a martyr, and me as the ungrateful child demanding a coronation while her beloved son suffered from burnout. She told me I needed to be reasonable. She told me that for the sake of peace in the house, I should be the bigger person. I held my ground. It was the first time in my life I had truly told her no on something of this magnitude. I told her I was getting married on that Saturday, at that farm, and I expected my parents and brother to be there. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. She told me we would talk later. We did not talk later, 3 days before the wedding. I received a text message. It was not a phone call. She did not even have the courage to hear my voice. The message was short. It read, "We will celebrate later. Logan cannot change the Hawaii booking. We hope you understand." I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. I did not cry immediately. I just felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach, a realization that I was not fighting for their attention anymore. I had lost. The wedding day dawned with a perfect, cruel beauty. The sky over Dundee Hills was a piercing blue, the kind of clear weather Oregonians pray for. The lavender was in full bloom, waves of violet stretching out toward the horizon. I stood in the small bridal suite of the farmhouse, adjusting the lace on my sleeves. My bridesmaids were buzzing around me, pouring champagne and laughing, but the air around me felt thin. When I walked out to the ceremony space, the first thing I saw was the gap. We had set up white wooden folding chairs on the grass. Ethan's side was full. His parents were there, beaming, holding hands in the front row. His aunts, uncles, cousins, and college friends filled the seats, a sea of supportive faces. My side looked like a smile with missing teeth. The front row, reserved for the parents of the bride and immediate family, was empty. 3 empty chairs sat there, baking in the sun. I could hear the silence of those empty seats louder than the string quartet playing nearby. I felt my heart drop, physically sinking in my chest, a sensation of vertigo so strong I almost stumbled on the grass. Then, I saw movement in the second row. A car had pulled up late on the gravel drive, kicking up dust. A woman was hurrying across the lawn, clutching her hat. It was Aunt Nora. Nora is my mother's older sister, and they have had a strained relationship for decades, mostly because Nora has a habit of telling the unvarnished truth. She lives in Chicago and hates flying. I had sent her an invitation but told her I understood if the travel was too much. Yet there she was, breathless, wearing a floral dress that clashed slightly with the rustic theme, looking absolutely beautiful to me. She did not go to her seat. She walked straight to me before I reached the aisle. She grabbed my shoulders, her grip firm and grounding. She looked at the empty front row, her lips pressing into a thin line, and then she looked back at me. She told me I was not doing this alone. She told me to keep my head up. I walked down the aisle to Ethan. When I took his hands, his grip was tight, angry on my behalf but tender for me. We said our vows. I promised to love him. I promised to prioritize him. As I spoke the words, I realized I was making a promise to build the kind of family I had never had. During the reception, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my clutch. It was a message from my father. Ray, my father is a man who has spent 30 years perfecting the art of being invisible to avoid my mother's wrath. The text was apologetic, but cowardly. He said he was sorry he could not be there, but it would have been impossible to let Logan go alone, and he could not let Mom travel by herself. He said they were thinking of me. He did not mention that they were currently likely sitting on a beach, sipping drinks bought with the money they saved by ignoring my wedding. I put the phone away and danced. I drank wine. I laughed with my friends. But the hole was there. You cannot patch a hole that size with cake and music. The final blow came the next morning. Ethan and I were packing up the decorations, loading boxes into the back of his truck. One of the venue staff handed me a small stack of envelopes that had been dropped in the secure gift box. I sat on the tailgate of the truck and flipped through them. Most were from friends, thick cards with heartfelt notes. Then I saw the familiar handwriting. It was a standard drugstore card, the kind with a generic pastel flower on the front. It had been mailed to the venue 2 days prior to ensure it arrived on the morning after. My mother's handwriting was looped and decorative. I opened it. Inside, there was a personal check. I looked at the amount, $100. For context, my parents had paid for Logan's car insurance for 3 years. They had helped him with rent when he wanted to try living in San Diego. They had just flown to Hawaii on a trip that, even with a discount, certainly cost thousands. $100. But it was the note written on the inside flap of the card that made my vision blur. It did not say congratulations. It did not say we love you. It did not apologize for the empty seats in the front row. It read, "You will understand priorities when you are older." I stared at the ink. The words were precise. They were meant to teach me a lesson. They were telling me that my wedding was a frivolous want, while my brother's vacation was a necessary need. They were telling me that my happiness was secondary to their convenience. I looked at the check again. $100, the price of a cheap dinner, the price of my worth in their eyes. Ethan came over and sat beside me. He saw the check. He saw the note. He went very still, the kind of stillness that happens before a storm. He asked me if I wanted to rip it up. I looked at the rolling fields of the farm, now quiet in the morning light. I looked at the empty space where they should have been. I folded the check and put it back in the envelope. "No," I told him. "I'm going to cash it." I kept the card. I put it in the front pocket of my bag, right next to my phone. I did not know it then, but that card was not a gift. It was evidence. It was the first document in a file that I would spend the next few months building. They thought they had taught me a lesson about priorities. They were right. They had taught me exactly where I stood, and they had freed me from the delusion that I could ever climb higher on their list. I closed the trunk of the truck. The sound echoed like a gunshot across the valley. I was married, I was a wife, and as we drove away from the lavender fields, leaving the empty chairs behind, I realized that the daughter who begged for scraps of affection had stayed behind too. The next few months would bring silence, then fake smiles, then demands. But they did not know that the Brianna who would answer those demands was not the same woman who had sent the invitations. That woman had died the moment she saw the text about Hawaii. The woman who replaced her was something entirely different, and she had a very long memory. Social media has a way of sanitizing cruelty. It filters out the context, crops out the ugly parts, and leaves behind a glossy, curated lie that everyone is eager to believe. 2 days after my wedding, while I was sitting in an airport terminal waiting to board our flight to wine country for a mini-moon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. There was Logan. The photo was high definition, vibrant with saturation. He was holding a tropical cocktail with a pineapple wedge on the rim, the ocean behind him a blinding turquoise. My father was in the background, asleep on a lounge chair, and my mother was smiling, looking tanned and relaxed, wearing an oversized sun hat. The caption consisted of 2 words that felt like a physical slap to my face: family reset. There was no mention of where they were not. There was no mention of the wedding they had skipped. To anyone scrolling past, it looked like a wholesome family vacation. It erased me completely. It was as if my wedding had never happened, or worse, as if it was an event so insignificant that missing it for a beach trip was the natural, healthy choice. Then came my mother's contribution to the digital narrative. She did not post a picture of the vacation. Marjorie is far too subtle for that. She operates in the realm of plausible deniability. She posted a text-only status update against a somber, cloudy background. It read, "A mother's heart breaks in silence when her sacrifices are forgotten. We give everything to our children, even when they do not understand the weight of our choices. Praying for peace and understanding today." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She did not name me. She did not mention the wedding, but every aunt, cousin, and family friend who saw it knew exactly who the ungrateful child was. She was painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable demands. She was rewriting the story before I had even finished writing my thank you notes. The narrative she was constructing was clear. I was the difficult daughter who did not understand that the family needed this vacation, and by proceeding with my wedding, I was the one causing division. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, that familiar, suffocating mix of anger and shame that she had installed in me since I was a little girl. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to scream in the comments. I wanted to post the timeline, the receipts, the dates we had booked the venue versus the date Logan booked his deal. Ethan reached over and gently took the phone from my hand. He did not say anything. He just raised his eyebrows in a silent question. I took a deep breath. Engaging with her publicly would only prove her point. It would make me look hysterical and defensive. So, I decided to play a different game. I opened my own photo gallery. I found a picture from the reception. It was a candid shot, not posed. I was laughing, head thrown back, holding a glass of champagne. Ethan was looking at me with pure adoration. Behind us, his parents were clapping, and Aunt Nora was right there, beaming, her hand on my shoulder. I posted it with a caption that was short, factual, and cut like a scalpel. Family is who shows up. I tagged Ethan, his parents, and Aunt Nora. I did not tag my mother. I did not tag Logan or my father. The reaction was immediate. Likes poured in from friends who had been there and seen the empty seats. But within 20 minutes, a notification popped up that made my stomach turn. Logan had commented. His comment read, "Beautiful pic. Sis, wish the schedules had aligned so we could have been there. Miss you guys." I stared at the screen, astounded by the audacity. Wish the schedules had aligned. As if it were an act of God. As if the airline had canceled their flight. As if he had not actively chosen to book a trip during the one weekend I had asked him to save a year in advance. He was doing it right there in the open, polishing the lie until it gleamed. He was performing the role of the loving, absent brother, making me look petty if I called him out. I did not delete the comment. I let it sit there. It was a monument to his narcissism. We landed in California and drove to a small cabin we had rented. The air smelled of eucalyptus and dry grass. It should have been paradise, but the ghost of my family followed us. On the second morning of our honeymoon, while I was in the shower, Ethan's phone buzzed on the nightstand. When I came out, towel wrapped around my hair, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at his screen with a furrowed brow. He looked up at me, hesitating. He asked if I wanted to see it, or if I wanted to enjoy our coffee first. I told him to show me. It was a text from Marjorie. She had bypassed me entirely. She knew I was likely ignoring her, so she went for the person she thought she could charm. The message was long, a wall of gray text. It said, "Hi, Ethan. I hope you two are having a nice time. I am worried about Brianna. I saw her post. She seems very angry and I think she is spiraling. You know how sensitive she can get when things do not go exactly her way. I just want you to help her look at things logically. We really needed this trip for Logan's mental health, and it hurts us that she is trying to make us look bad publicly. Please help her see reason. We love her so much." I read it twice. The words swam before my eyes. Sensitive, spiraling, logically. These were the key words of my childhood. Every time I had a legitimate grievance, I was labeled sensitive. Every time I pointed out a disparity between how Logan was treated and how I was treated, I was told I was not being logical. She was trying to recruit my husband to manage me. She wanted him to be her enforcer, to gaslight me into believing that my hurt feelings were a symptom of my own instability, not a reaction to her neglect. Ethan looked at me, his expression serious. He asked me how I wanted him to respond. He said he was ready to tell her exactly where she could shove her logic. I looked at the phone, and then I looked at the window where the morning light was hitting the trees. For the first time in 34 years, the urge to explain myself vanished. I realized that explaining was a form of pleading. It was an attempt to get her to see my reality, but she saw my reality perfectly fine. She just did not care about it. I handed the phone back to him. I told him not to reply. He looked surprised. He asked if I was sure. I told him I was absolutely sure. I told him that I was done explaining my pain to people who caused it on purpose. I picked up my own phone. I went to the family group chat, the one where they were currently sharing photos of their luau dinner. I did not leave the group. That would be a dramatic statement they could use against me. Instead, I hit mute. Then I went to the settings and selected archive. The chat vanished from my main feed, buried in a digital folder I never had to look at unless I chose to. A strange sensation washed over me. It was not relief, exactly. It felt colder than that. It was clarity. It was the feeling of waking up in a room and realizing the temperature had dropped 10 degrees, and finally understanding that you needed to put on a coat rather than wishing the window would close itself. When we returned from the honeymoon, Aunt Nora came over for tea. She brought a store-bought coffee cake and a folder of old photographs she had found in her attic. We sat in my living room, the muted gray light of Portland filtering through the rain. We talked about the wedding, carefully avoiding the topic of the empty seats until Nora brought it up herself. She took a sip of her tea and looked me dead in the eye. She told me that she was proud of me for not causing a scene, but she hoped I knew that this was not an accident. She told me about a summer when I was 7. I had a dance recital. It was a solo. Marjorie had missed it because Logan, who was 2 at the time, had a mild ear infection, not a fever, not an emergency, just a fussy ear. Ray had offered to stay home with him, but Marjorie had insisted the whole family needed to stay together to support him. Nora said my mother has a pathological need to keep Logan at the center of the universe because his dependence makes her feel necessary. I, on the other hand, was born capable. I was born independent. And to a woman like Marjorie, a child who does not need her is a child who is rejecting her. So, she rejects me first to regain the power. It made perfect sense. It was twisted, sick, and undeniably true. She did not skip my wedding because she loved Hawaii. She skipped my wedding because celebrating me required her to be a spectator, not the main character. That afternoon, I made a silent vow to myself. I called it the law of reciprocity. From that day forward, I would treat my family exactly like a bank transaction. I would not extend credit. I would not offer loans of emotional energy. If they wanted my time, my presence, or my help, they had to have a sufficient balance in their account. And right now, their account was overdrawn. I went back to work at Northline Creative Systems. I threw myself into a new campaign launch. I found solace in the clear, binary nature of my job. In project management, if someone misses a deadline, there is a consequence. There are no tears, no guilt trips, just cause and effect. I began to apply this to my personal life. Months passed. The leaves in Portland turned from green to gold to rotting brown. The silence from my family was deafening, but it was a peaceful silence. I did not call them. They did not call me, presumably waiting for me to break first and apologize for being sensitive. Then, on a Tuesday in November, a notification appeared on my phone. It was Instagram. Marjorie had liked a photo. It was not a new photo. It was a picture I had posted 3 years ago. A generic shot of a pumpkin patch. Then another notification. She liked a photo of my college graduation. Then another. She was liking photos from deep in my archive, ignoring the wedding photos entirely. It is a tactic known as hoovering, trying to suck the victim back in by reminding them of the good times, by showing a low-effort sign of affection without actually having to speak or apologize. She was testing the fence. She was checking to see if the gate was still locked. I stared at the screen, watching the little heart icons pop up one after another. She was trying to soften the ground. She was preparing to ask for something. Marjorie never offers affection for free. It is always a down payment on a future demand. I did not like her likes back. I did not text her. I put the phone down and went back to my spreadsheet. I was not the daughter who craved those crumbs anymore. I was the bank manager, and I knew a bad investment when I saw one. Whatever she was planning, whatever game she was starting, she was about to realize that the rules had changed. She thought she was dealing with the girl who cried when she was left behind. She did not know she was dealing with a woman who had learned how to lock the door. The silence of the last few months had not been empty time for me. It had been training, and when the request finally came, and I knew it would come, I would be ready. The honey was gone. All that was left was the razor blade. The arrival of the invitation was not a surprise, but the weight of the envelope still managed to offend me. It was heavy. The kind of cream-colored cardstock that costs more per ounce than a good steak. It had gold foil lining the inner flap and calligraphy so elaborate it was almost illegible. I pulled it out of my mailbox on a rainy Tuesday, the paper dry and pristine against the damp world of Portland, looking like an artifact from a life I no longer recognized. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen island. Ethan was making dinner, chopping vegetables with a rhythmic thud against the cutting board. He stopped when he saw the envelope. He knew exactly what it was. We both did. Marjorie's recent social media activity, the sudden flurry of likes on my old photos, had been the artillery fire softening the target before the infantry arrived. I opened it. The invitation requested the honor of our presence at the wedding of Logan Hale and Sienna Miller. The venue was a resort in Clearwater Beach, Florida, a 5-star establishment known for its white sands and exclusionary pricing. The date was set for 3 months from now. Tucked behind the RSVP card was a smaller piece of stationery, personal notepaper with my mother's monogram embossed at the top. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, looping and performative. It read, "The family would be so happy if you and Ethan were there. It is time for us all to be together again." I read it twice, searching for the invisible ink where the apology might be hidden. I looked for the words, "I am sorry." I looked for, "We made a mistake." I looked for, "We miss you." But those words were not there. There was only a polite command disguised as a sentiment. The family would be so happy. It was a statement that placed the burden of that happiness squarely on my shoulders. If I came, they would be happy. If I did not, I would be the reason for their unhappiness. I handed the note to Ethan. He read it and let out a short, dry laugh. He noted that for people who claimed to be broke after their Hawaii trip, they certainly found the budget for gold foil. That evening, the phone rang. It was Marjorie. I had not spoken to her verbally since before my wedding. Her voice on the other end was bright, airy, and completely detached from reality. It was her hostess voice, the tone she used when she was trying to impress a neighbor or talk her way out of a speeding ticket. She asked if I had received the invitation. She did not wait for an answer. She launched into a monologue about how beautiful the resort was, how Sienna had picked out the most gorgeous linens, and how Logan was so excited to start this new chapter. She used phrases like fresh start and turning a new leaf. She talked about how important it was for the family to present a united front. I listened to her describe the ocean view rooms she had blocked out for the guests. I listened to her talk about the rehearsal dinner on a yacht. And as she spoke, I felt a cold, jagged anger rising in my throat. It was not the hot, tearful anger of the past. It was something solid. I interrupted her. I asked her, very calmly, what she meant by a fresh start. She paused, caught off guard by my interruption. She said she meant putting the past behind us. She said families fight, but they move on. I asked her if moving on meant pretending that she and Dad had not skipped my wedding to go to a beach in Hawaii. The silence that followed was thick. I could hear her breathing on the other line. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its sparkle. It was tighter, lower. She told me that I was holding on to things. She said that what happened with Hawaii was a scheduling conflict, a misunderstanding. She called it a small thing. A small thing. My mother looked at the empty chairs at her daughter's wedding. The humiliation I faced as I walked down the aisle without my parents. The check for $100 that was meant to teach me my place. And she categorized it all as a small thing. I told her it was not small to me. She sighed, the sound of a martyr being forced to deal with a petty bureaucrat. She told me that Logan was my brother. She said this was his special day. She said that if I could not find it in my heart to be happy for him, I should at least have the decency to show up for the family photo. There it was, the truth. She did not need me there because she missed me. She needed me there because a family photo with a missing sister prompts questions. She needed me there as a prop. I told her I would check my calendar. I hung up before she could guilt me further. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Logan. It was the first time he had contacted me directly since his family reset post. The message was casual, breezy, as if we were friends who had just lost touch over a busy weekend. He wrote, "Hey sis, Mom says you are being weird about the invite. It has been long enough. Do not make this about you. Just come and have a drink. It is going to be epic." I stared at the screen. Do not make this about you. In Logan's world, my existence was an inconvenience unless it was serving him. My pain was an attention-seeking tactic. He genuinely believed that by reacting to their neglect, I was the one creating the drama. He had rewritten the narrative so completely that in his mind, He was the peacemaker extending an olive branch to his difficult, grudge-holding sister. I showed the text to Ethan. He shook his head, looking disgusted. He pointed out the strategy they were using. He said it was classic Darvo behavior: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. They denied they did anything wrong by calling it a small thing. They attacked me for being weird and holding grudges, and now they were reversing the roles, making themselves the victims of my stubbornness and making me the offender who was ruining the family harmony. Ethan sat down next to me and took my hand. He told me that they did not want Brianna the person. He said they wanted Brianna the cardboard cutout. They wanted me to stand in the back, smile for the camera, prove to all their relatives that they were good parents who raised a tight-knit family, and then disappear when the bill came. He was right. They had made a mess of their reputation by skipping my wedding. Rumors had likely started. Aunt Nora had probably told a few people the truth. Now they needed me to scrub the stain out. My attendance at Logan's wedding would be the ultimate validation. If I was there, smiling and clapping, it proved that what they did to me was not that bad. It would absolve them of everything. I called Aunt Nora the next day. I needed to hear it from someone who shared my blood but not their delusion. Nora did not mince words. She told me that she had already received her invitation and had already sent her regrets. She told me she had no intention of spending $2,000 to watch Marjorie preen around a resort pretending she was Mother of the Year. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I felt guilty. I admitted that the old programming was kicking in. The voice in my head saying that I should be the bigger person, that I should not punish Logan for my mother's choices, even though Logan was a willing participant. Nora stopped me. She said something that cut through the fog. She told me that if I went to that wedding just to make them look good, I would be betraying myself. She said that every time I swallowed my dignity to keep the peace, I was teaching them that I had no price. She told me that I was the only one who could protect the little girl inside me who was still waiting for her mom to show up. That little girl was never going to get her mom, but she could have me. I hung up the phone and walked into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, but I also looked different than I had 6 months ago. The softness around my eyes was gone. I practiced saying it. I will not attend. It felt too formal. I am not coming. It felt too angry. I looked at my reflection. I thought about the empty chairs. I thought about the family reset caption. I thought about the $100 check. I thought about the sheer entitlement of demanding my presence to fix a breakage they had caused. I realized I did not owe them an explanation. I did not owe them a fight. I did not owe them a negotiation. Every time I explained why I was hurt, I gave them an opportunity to argue that I shouldn't be. I walked back out to the kitchen where the invitation was still sitting on the counter. I picked up my phone. I did not use the RSVP card. That would take too long. I wanted them to know now. I opened the message thread with my mother. I saw her last message, the one asking me to be reasonable. I typed 2 sentences. I did not apologize. I did not make up an excuse about work. I did not lie about a prior commitment. I simply stated the reality of my position. I wrote, "We will not be attending, not this time." I hit send. Then I blocked the family reset noise in my head. I knew what would happen next. I knew the rage that would follow. I knew they would call me selfish. I knew they would tell everyone I was jealous. But for the first time in my life, I did not care what story they told. I knew the truth, and I knew that by saying no to them, I was finally saying yes to myself. I watched the delivered status appear under the message. Then, 3 dots appeared, bubbling as she typed a furious response. I turned the phone over, face down on the table. Let them type. Let them scream into the void. I was not listening anymore. The fallout from my refusal was instant and nuclear. My phone did not just vibrate. It convulsed on the table. A physical manifestation of my mother's rage. I did not pick up. I let it dance across the wood surface, buzzing with incoming calls and rapid-fire text messages. When the calls finally stopped, the voicemails began to populate. I listened to the first one on speakerphone. Ethan standing next to me with his arms crossed, his jaw set tight. Marjorie's voice was unrecognizable. The airy hostess tone she had used earlier was gone, replaced by a guttural, shaking fury. She called me selfish. She called me petty. She asked how I could be so small-minded as to ruin my brother's happiness over a scheduling conflict from the past. She said I was tearing the family apart piece by piece, and that I would regret this when I was old and alone. She did not sound like a mother speaking to a child. She sounded like a manager whose star employee had just quit on the busiest day of the year. Then came Logan. His nice guy mask, the one he wore when he told me to just come and have a drink, disintegrated the moment he realized I was not bluffing. His texts shifted from breezy to venomous in the span of 10 minutes. He wrote that I was pathetic for holding a grudge this long. He told me that I always wanted to be the center of attention, and that refusing to come to his wedding was just my way of making his day about me. He said, "You can't stand that for once. Mom and Dad are focused on me and not worrying about your drama." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He was accusing me of wanting attention while demanding I fly across the country to serve as a prop in his pageant. He was accusing me of drama while he was the one demanding I ignore reality to preserve his fantasy. I did not reply. I had learned that silence is a vacuum, and narcissists hate vacuums. They will fill it with whatever noise they can generate, usually exposing themselves in the process. Sure enough, when I did not engage in a private fight, Marjorie took it public. She went to the extended family group chat, the one I had archived but that Aunt Nora was still monitoring. Nora sent me screenshots. Marjorie had posted a long, rambling paragraph. She did not name me, but she did not have to. She wrote about the pain of raising a child who grows up to be cold and unforgiving. She wrote about how hard she tries to keep the family together, only to be met with stony silence and calculated cruelty. She ended with a plea for everyone to pray for my hardened heart. It was a performance. She was playing the martyr, trying to get the aunts and cousins to rally around her and condemn me. Usually, this works. The family dynamic relies on everyone keeping the boat steady. But this time, something shifted. Below Marjorie's long lament, a message appeared from my cousin David. David is not particularly close to me, but he is an accountant, a man of numbers and facts. He wrote simply, "Is this about Brianna? Is she not going because you guys skipped her wedding for Hawaii?" The group chat went dead silent. Marjorie did not reply to him. She could not. To reply would be to admit the timeline. To deny it would be a lie that everyone knew was false. Then another cousin, Sarah, chimed in. "Yeah, I was wondering about that. It seemed really weird that the front row was empty in Oregon." Marjorie had lost control of the narrative. She had tried to paint me as the villain, but she forgot that people have memories. She forgot that the empty chairs at my wedding were a public spectacle. By trying to shame me for missing Logan's wedding, she had inadvertently reminded everyone that she had missed mine first. I sat in my living room, looking at the screenshots, and I waited for the panic to set in. I waited for the familiar shaking in my hands, the overwhelming urge to call her and apologize just to make the bad feelings stop. But the shaking never came. Instead, I felt a strange, icy calm. It was the feeling of a surgeon looking at a patient and realizing there is nothing left to save. I realized that my fear of her anger had been tied to my hope for her love. I was afraid of making her mad because I wanted her to love me. Now that I knew she was incapable of loving me the way I needed. Her anger had no teeth. It was just noise. Ethan walked into the room with his laptop open. He asked me what I wanted to do during the week of Logan's wedding. I looked at him. I told him I did not want to sit at home. If we stayed in Portland, I would spend the whole week wondering what was happening in Florida. I would be checking social media. I would be waiting for the guilt to creep in. I told him I wanted to go to the mountains. We opened a travel site. We looked at dates. The week of Logan's wedding in Clearwater Beach coincided perfectly with the late ski season in Colorado. We found a lodge in Telluride. It was expensive. It was luxurious. It was far away from any beach. Ethan looked at the booking screen. He smiled, a sharp, mischievous smile. He said that we should probably book the non-refundable option, just to be safe. I nodded. I told him to book it. And then, I did something petty. I admit it. I drafted a generic email reply to the Save the Date chain that Logan had sent out months ago, the one that included all the cousins. I wrote, "So sad we will miss it. We have a non-refundable trip to Colorado booked for those dates. The schedule just didn't align. Hope you have a great reset." I used their words. Schedule didn't align. Reset. I did not send it to Marjorie or Logan. I sent it to the group. The fallout was immediate. Aunt Nora texted me a row of clapping hand emojis. She told me that for the first time in 40 years, she was watching Marjorie scramble. Nora told me that Marjorie was now calling relatives individually, trying to do damage control. She was telling them that I was having a mental breakdown, that I was unstable, and that I would definitely be there. Marjorie was telling everyone, "Oh, you know Brianna. She is just dramatic. She will change her mind at the last minute. She will be there. I am holding her room." She was banking on the fact that I always capitulated. She believed that when push came to shove, I would not dare humiliate the family by actually staying away. She was treating my no as a negotiation tactic, not a final decision. This was dangerous. If she told everyone I was coming, and then I didn't show up, she could spin it that I flaked at the last second. She could paint me as unreliable, chaotic, and cruel for leaving them hanging. She could say, "We held a room for her, we paid for her plate, and she just didn't show up." I needed to make sure she could not do that. I needed to make sure that my absence was a documented, unchangeable fact. I looked at the confirmation email for the lodge in Colorado. That was step one, but I needed something more definitive. I needed a way to prove that I was never, ever going to be in Florida. I picked up my phone and called my bank. I asked to speak to a representative about setting up a travel notice. I told them I would be in Colorado for those specific dates, and that any charges attempted in Florida should be flagged as fraud. Then, I opened a document on my computer. I began to compile a timeline. Not for her, for me. The next few weeks were a bizarre game of chicken. Marjorie continued to tell family members that I was coming. She even sent me a text asking if I wanted the chicken or the fish, ignoring my previous refusal entirely. I did not reply to the text. Instead, I took a screenshot of it. I forwarded it to Aunt Nora. Nora called me. She sounded worried. She said that Marjorie was so convincing that even she was starting to wonder if I had secretly changed my mind. She said Marjorie was talking about my dress, about how I would be doing a reading during the ceremony. A reading. I had never agreed to a reading. She was building a stage, setting the props, and waiting for me to walk on. She was so deluded by her own control that she could not conceive of a world where I did not obey. I told Nora to listen to me very carefully. I told her I was not coming. I told her that on the day of the wedding, I would be on top of a mountain in Telluride. Nora asked if I wanted her to tell Marjorie to stop lying. I said no. I told her to let Marjorie lie. Let her build the house of cards as high as she wanted. Let her promise everyone that I would be there. Let her print my name in the program. Let her set a place setting for me at the head table. Because the higher she built it, the harder it would fall when the chair remained empty. I realized then that this was not just about missing a wedding. This was a war of realities. Marjorie was fighting to maintain the reality where she was the perfect mother and I was the difficult child who eventually fell in line. I was fighting for the reality where actions have consequences. I looked at the calendar. 4 weeks to go. My heart rate was steady. My hands were still. I went to the closet and pulled out my suitcase. I did not pack a sundress. I packed my heavy winter coat. They wanted a show? Fine, but they were looking at the wrong stage. The real show was not going to be at the altar in Clearwater. The real show was going to be the silence I left behind, and this time, I had made sure that silence would be deafening. 3 days after I booked the non-refundable lodge in Telluride, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with a Florida area code. I assumed it was a telemarketer, or perhaps the resort in Clearwater calling to confirm the room Marjorie claimed she was holding for me. I almost sent it to voicemail. But my professional instinct kicked in. I work in campaign management. Ignoring unknown numbers can mean missing a crisis. I answered with my work voice, crisp and detached. The woman on the other end sounded harried. She identified herself as the accounts receivable manager for a luxury event rental company in Tampa. She asked if she was speaking to Brianna Hale. I confirmed that she was. She let out a sigh of relief. She said she was calling regarding the final balance for the lighting and drapery package for the Hale Miller wedding. She said the card on file had been declined twice, and since the event was less than a month away, they needed to settle the remaining $3,000 immediately, or they would release the equipment to another client. I sat very still. The air in my home office seemed to vanish. I told her, very slowly, that there must be a mistake. I told her I was not paying for that wedding. The woman paused. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. She said she was looking at the contract right now. She said Logan Hale was the groom, but Brianna Hale was listed as the secondary contact and the guarantor for the deposit waiver. The world tilted. Guarantor. I asked her to read me the email address associated with my name on the file. She read out an address that was almost mine, but not quite. It was my first name, my last name, and the number of my childhood home at a generic email provider. It was an account I had never created. Then I asked her what phone number she had. She read my actual cell number. I felt a wave of nausea. I told the woman, with as much calm as I could muster, that I had not signed that contract. I told her I had not authorized anyone to use my name as a guarantor. I told her that if she ran a credit check on me without my permission, we would be having a very different conversation involving my lawyer. The woman's tone shifted from annoyed to frightened. She apologized profusely. She said she would flag the account for fraud review and contact the primary party. Logan. I hung up and stared at the wall. My hands were not shaking, but my stomach was churning. Ethan walked in a moment later, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He took one look at my face and set the mugs down. He asked what happened. I told him. I told him about the lighting rig. I told him about the fake email. Ethan sat down heavily. He rubbed his face with his hands. He reminded me of a conversation we had about a year ago. Marjorie had called me, sounding frantic and disorganized, claiming she was updating her legacy files or some nonsense. She had asked for my current address, my employment verification for a family insurance policy she was setting up, and she had asked me to verify some security questions. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual chaotic self, trying to play the matriarch who manages the family estate. I had given her the information because it seemed harmless. Ethan looked at me. He said they did not just use my name to fill a blank space. He said Logan probably did not have the credit score to rent high-end equipment without a massive deposit. He said they used my stable job and my good credit rating to get the trust me rate. They used me as collateral. I grabbed my phone and called Aunt Nora. I did not bother with pleasantries. I asked her what Marjorie was telling people about the wedding costs. Nora hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I pressed her. I asked her to tell me exactly what the gossip was. Nora sighed. She lowered her voice, even though she was in her own home. She said that Marjorie had been telling the aunts and cousins that I was feeling incredibly guilty about the Hawaii misunderstanding. She said Marjorie told everyone that, as a peace offering. I had insisted on covering the costs of the lighting and the flowers to make it up to Logan. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was diabolical. It was brilliant. Marjorie had solved 2 problems with 1 lie. She had found a way to pay for a wedding they could not afford, and she had rehabilitated my image in a way that served her narrative. By claiming I was paying, she made me look like I was admitting fault. If I paid, I was the repentant daughter buying her way back into the fold. If I showed up, I was the supportive sister. And if I didn't show up, well, then she could say I paid because I was too ashamed to face them. I was not just a prop. I was a piggy bank. I asked Nora if anyone else knew the truth. Nora said that most of the family just nodded along. They wanted to believe the happy ending, but then she dropped another piece of information. She told me to talk to my cousin Jessica. Jessica is close with Sienna, Logan's fiancée. I thanked Nora and hung up. I texted Jessica immediately. We had not spoken much in years, but Jessica has always had a loose tongue after a glass of wine. I asked her straight out, "Is Logan in trouble with money?" Jessica replied within minutes. The dots bubbled for a long time. Then a block of text arrived. She said it was a mess. She said Sienna was freaking out because Logan had promised her a Pinterest wedding, but his cards kept getting declined. She said Ray and Marjorie had tapped into their retirement savings to pay for the venue, but they were short on the vendors. She said Logan was counting on gifts from the guests to pay off the balances after the wedding. They were insolvent. They were throwing a party for 200 people on a foundation of debt and lies, and they were using my name to patch the holes in the hull. I looked at Ethan. I told him I needed a folder. For the next 3 hours, I turned into a forensic accountant. I went through every text message from the last 2 years. I found the requests for information. I found the vague allusions to handling things. I pulled my credit report. Thankfully, there were no open loans, but there were 2 soft inquiries from vendors in Florida that I had not noticed before. I started taking screenshots. I organized them by date. Exhibit A, the text where Marjorie asked for my employment details. Exhibit B, the family reset post, proving they were in Hawaii when they should have been at my wedding. Exhibit C, the email from the rental company confirming I was listed as a guarantor. Exhibit D, the message from Nora confirming Marjorie's lie about me, making amends. I was building a dossier. Ethan asked me what I was going to do. He asked if I was going to call the police. I looked at the pile of evidence. Calling the police on my mother would be the nuclear option. It would end the family forever. It would make me the villain in the eyes of everyone who did not understand the nuance of financial abuse. I told him no. I was not going to call the police yet. I was not going to sabotage the wedding. I was not going to call the other vendors and cancel the contracts, even though I probably could. I was going to wait. I realized that they were counting on my silence. They were counting on the fact that I was Brianna the Peacemaker. They assumed that even if I found out, I would quietly pay the $3,000 to avoid embarrassing the family. They assumed I would eat the cost just like I ate the cost of my own wedding. But they had forgotten about the check. I went to the drawer in my desk where I kept my important papers. I pulled out the envelope from my wedding day. I pulled out the card with the pastel flower. I pulled out the check for $100. I looked at the memo line, wedding gift. I looked at the note, you will understand priorities when you are older. I understood them perfectly now. Their priority was image. Their priority was Logan. Their priority was using me to subsidize a life they could not afford. I took a picture of the check. I added it to the folder. I turned to Ethan. I told him that I was not going to pay the $3,000. I told him I was going to let the rental company decline the card. I was going to let the lighting rig be repossessed. I was going to let the drapery be canceled. And when Marjorie called, and I knew she would call, screaming that I was ruining everything, I would not argue, I would not cry, I would simply send her one file. I looked at the total amount they were trying to pin on me. It was not just money, it was the cost of my dignity. I told Ethan that for years. I thought my mother just didn't love me enough. I realize now that it was worse. She loved me exactly enough to use me. She saw me as a resource, a line of credit, a safety net that she could deploy whenever her golden sun fell off the tightrope. I closed the folder. I named the file on my computer, the ledger. I picked up my phone and sent a short email to the woman at the rental company. To accounts receivable. From Brianna Hale. Subject, unauthorized account activity. I am confirming in writing that I am not a party to this contract. I did not sign as a guarantor. Any signature on file purporting to be mine is a forgery. Please remove my name from this account immediately. If you require payment, please contact the groom, Logan Hale, or his parents, Ray and Marjorie Hale. I will not be liable for these charges. I hit send. I felt a dark, cold satisfaction. I was not throwing a rock through their window. I was simply removing the beam I had been unknowingly holding up, and I was going to watch the roof cave in from the safety of a mountaintop in Colorado. The not this time was no longer just about attendance. It was about the check. They had given me $100 and a lesson on priorities. I was about to give them a lesson on solvency, and unlike their gift, mine was going to bounce. The week leading up to the wedding was not a countdown to a celebration. It was a countdown to a detonation. After I sent the email to the rental company denying liability for the debt, the silence from my family broke. It shattered. My phone became a device of harassment. Marjorie called me 6 times in 1 hour. She did not leave voicemails anymore. She just kept calling, hoping to catch me off guard, hoping to wear me down through sheer acoustic exhaustion. When I finally answered on a Tuesday evening, 3 days before the ceremony, her voice was a fluctuating mix of hysteria and venom. She started with a threat. She told me that if the lighting rig was repossessed, it would be my fault. She said I was sabotaging my brother out of spite. I cut her off. My voice was steady, the kind of steady that only comes when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. I told her that I did not sign the contract. I told her that using my name was fraud. And then I gave her my final condition. I said, I am not coming, and I do not give you permission to tell people I am busy with work. Marjorie gasped. She asked what I expected her to say. She asked if I wanted her to tell 200 guests that her daughter was a vindictive monster. I told her I did not care what she told them, as long as it was not a lie about my career. I told her that if I heard even a whisper that I was stuck on a campaign launch or dealing with a client crisis, I would post a geotagged photo of myself drinking cocoa in the mountains with a caption clarifying that my schedule was wide open. She went silent. She knew I meant it. The threat of public exposure was the only language she spoke fluently. She hung up on me. But panic makes people sloppy. Marjorie immediately began a campaign of suppression. She started calling the key gossip hubs of the family, the aunts, the older cousins, trying to inoculate them against the truth. She did not tell them I wasn't coming. She told them that if I didn't come, it was because I was having a mental health crisis, and out of respect for the family, nobody should mention the H word. Hawaii. She was terrified that my absence would trigger a memory of their absence. Aunt Nora called me 10 minutes after Marjorie got off the phone with her. Nora sounded amused. She told me Marjorie had practically begged her not to bring up last year. Marjorie had said, "We need to focus on the future." Nora, bringing up old history only hurts the kids. Nora had laughed. She told me she said exactly what needed to be said. She told Marjorie, "If you wanted people to forget you went to Hawaii during Brianna's wedding, you probably should not have gone to Hawaii during Brianna's wedding." Marjorie had slammed the phone down. Then came Logan. Realizing that I was not going to pay the bill and I was not going to show up to smooth things over, Logan decided to weaponize his audience. He went to TikTok and Instagram. He posted a video of himself sitting on a hotel bed in Florida, looking downcast, playing with his wedding band. The lighting was dim. The mood was somber. He spoke to the camera with a rehearsed wobble in his voice. He said, "Hey guys, just wanted to hop on here. Big day is coming up, but it is bittersweet. Found out my big sister isn't going to make it. It just hurts, you know? You want your family there when you start your new life, but I guess we just have to love people from a distance sometimes." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He didn't say why I wasn't coming. He left it open so his followers could fill in the blanks with their own assumptions about my cruelty. The comments started rolling in immediately. "She is toxic. You don't need that energy. Focus on the people who love you." I felt a spike of rage, but I did not type a single word. I did not have to. My cousin David, the accountant who had spoken up in the group chat, saw the video. He did not care about Logan's influencer aspirations. He commented right under the video, visible to everyone. He wrote, "Is she not coming because you guys skipped her wedding to go to Hawaii last year? Or is this about something else?" The comment sat there like a grenade. Logan deleted it within 5 minutes, but 5 minutes on the internet is an eternity. People had seen it. Other comments started popping up. "Wait, you missed her wedding? Is that true? Why did you go to Hawaii?" Logan turned off the comments on the video. Then he deleted the video entirely. He had tried to rally the mob, but he forgot that the mob hates hypocrisy more than it loves a victim. Thursday night, the night before we flew to Colorado. My phone rang again. It was Marjorie. But she wasn't calling me. She was calling Ethan. Ethan looked at the caller ID and put it on speaker without asking me. He wanted me to hear this. Marjorie's voice was desperate. She was crying, or at least making the sounds of crying. She told Ethan that I was out of control. She said I was vindictive and that I needed help. She pleaded with him to talk sense into me. She said, "Ethan, you are a reasonable man. You know how bad this looks. If she doesn't show up, it casts a shadow over the whole day. Please, just get her on the plane. I will pay for the tickets. I will pay for everything." I listened from the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter. She was offering to pay for plane tickets, but she hadn't paid the rental company. She was scrambling to buy my compliance with money she didn't have. Ethan waited for her to finish sobbing. His voice was calm, polite, and absolutely final. He said, "Marjorie, we are not coming, and we are not going to pretend that this is normal. You guys made a choice last year. Now Brianna is making hers. We do not participate in rewriting history to make you feel comfortable." He hung up. He blocked her number. The next morning, we boarded a flight to Montrose. As the plane lifted off the runway, leaving the gray rain of Portland behind, I felt a physical sensation of weightlessness that had nothing to do with altitude. For 34 years, every family event had been a performance review. Every holiday was a test I was destined to fail. I looked out the window at the clouds. I was not going to Florida. I was not wearing a dress I hated. I was not standing in a receiving line forcing a smile while my mother took credit for a party she didn't pay for. I was free. We arrived in Telluride in the late afternoon. The air was thin and cold, biting at my cheeks. It was the opposite of the humid, suffocating heat of Clearwater Beach. We checked into the lodge. It was quiet. There was a fire crackling in the lobby. Saturday came, the day of the wedding. I woke up early. I knew that in Florida, it was 2 hours ahead. They would be starting the hair and makeup. Marjorie would be terrorizing the photographer. Logan would be sweating, wondering if the lighting company was going to show up to repossess their equipment before or after the vows. Ethan and I took the gondola up the mountain. We had rented snowshoes. We hiked out to a ridge overlooking the valley. The snow was blindingly white, untouched, stretching out for miles. It was silent. My phone was in my pocket. At 2 o'clock Mountain Time, 4 o'clock Eastern, the exact time the ceremony was scheduled to begin, it started to buzz. It buzzed against my hip, long vibrations, short vibrations. It was a frantic rhythm. I stopped hiking. I pulled the phone out. The screen was lighting up with calls from my father, then a text from Aunt Nora, then a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ethan stopped and looked at me. He asked if I wanted to answer. I looked at the phone. I looked at the vast, indifferent mountains. I thought about the empty chairs in the lavender field. I thought about the check for $100. I held the power button down. I watched the screen go black. I put the phone back in my pocket. I told Ethan I was ready to keep walking. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the snow. We drank hot chocolate in the village. We ate a dinner that cost more than the check my parents had given me. We did not talk about Logan. We did not talk about Marjorie. It wasn't until late that night, when we were back in the room and I finally turned my phone back on, that the floodgates opened. There were dozens of notifications, but one stood out. It was a text from Jessica, the cousin who knew about the financial mess. She had sent it 2 hours ago. The text read, "You are not going to believe this." Marjorie grabbed the microphone at the reception. She told everyone you were heartbroken to miss it, but you were called away on a massive political crisis for work. She was crying fake tears. I felt a surge of anger. She had defied my one condition. She had lied. But then I read the second part of Jessica's message. But it didn't work. People are whispering. I heard Uncle Bob ask Dad why you would work on a Saturday if you managed to take time off for your own wedding. And then someone else said, "Well, they didn't go to hers, so why should she come to this?" The Hawaii story is out. Brianna, everyone is talking about it. I smiled. The truth had leaked. But then a third message popped up. Just now, as I was reading, it was from Aunt Nora. It was short, written in all caps. They are saying you are stuck at work. But everyone remembers Hawaii. There is something bigger happening here. The lights just went out. I stared at the screen, the lights. The rental company. They hadn't repossessed the equipment before the wedding. They had waited. They had waited until the reception was in full swing, until the moment of maximum impact. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I had stayed away to avoid the drama. But it seemed the drama had found a way to happen anyway. I wasn't there to witness it. But I didn't need to be. The check had bounced. The lights had gone out. And for the first time in the history of the Hale family, the consequences were landing exactly where they belonged. The Monday after Logan's wedding, the official photos began to circulate on social media like a virus. From a distance, they looked like the epitome of luxury. The white sand was pristine, the ocean was a filtered shade of turquoise, and everyone was smiling that tight, frozen smile that suggests they are holding their breath. But when I zoomed in, the story changed. The official family portrait was the smoking gun. Usually, the photographer arranges the family in a balanced composition, parents in the middle, siblings flanking them. In this photo, my parents stood on one side of Logan and Sienna. On the other side, there was nothing, just empty air, a gap. It looked like someone had been erased from the image by a Stalinist censor. Marjorie was leaning awkwardly toward Logan, trying to fill the space where I should have been, but her body language just screamed desperation. It was the visual equivalent of the empty chairs at my wedding, only this time, the emptiness was broadcast to the world. Aunt Nora called me that evening. She had returned from Florida with a sunburn and a dossier of gossip that was frankly explosive. She told me that the lighting incident I had triggered by refusing to pay the bill had been the turning point of the night. Apparently, when the lights on the dance floor went dark, there was a panic. Marjorie had tried to claim it was a technical glitch, a blown fuse, but the lead vendor had walked right up to the head table, loud enough for the first 3 tables to hear, and demanded a valid credit card, or the equipment was going on the truck. Nora told me that my father, Ray, had turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He had to pull out his emergency credit card, the one he swore he only kept for medical disasters, and swipe it right there next to the wedding cake. He had just financed a $3,000 light show while his son stood there looking at his shoes. But the real drama happened behind the scenes. Nora told me that Sienna, my new sister-in-law, had spent a significant portion of the reception crying in the bridal suite, and not happy tears. It turns out, Marjorie had not just directed the guest list. She had directed the entire production. She had insisted on the expensive resort view photos. She had insisted on the choreographed mother-son dance that lasted 6 minutes. She had turned the wedding into a shrine to the Hale family image, treating Sienna like a supporting actress in her own movie. Nora said that late in the night, she overheard a screaming match between Logan and Sienna near the elevators. Sienna was furious about the money. Logan had apparently upgraded the bar package to ultra premium and added a surprise fireworks display to make it look good for the vlog, despite having $0 in his bank account. Sienna had screamed, "You are spending money we do not have to impress people you do not even like." And Logan, true to form, had shouted back, "Mom said it would be handled." That was the key phrase. Mom said it would be handled. They were all operating on a delusion that money was a renewable resource that simply appeared when they needed to save face. And for years, I had been that resource. Now that the resource was gone, they were eating each other. The narrative Marjorie tried to spin, that I was stuck at work, began to crumble almost immediately. People talk. My cousin Jessica had been telling people about the Hawaii timeline. Another cousin had mentioned seeing my no RSVP months ago. The guests started doing the math. Nora told me that by the time the brunch rolled around on Sunday morning, the mood had shifted. People were not looking at Marjorie with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with suspicion. They saw a woman who had skipped her daughter's wedding and then tried to lie about why her daughter skipped her son's. I went back to work on Tuesday feeling a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't happy that their lives were messy. I am not a sadist, but I was relieved that the mess was finally staying within their property lines. Then, on Wednesday, my phone rang. It was Logan. I debated not answering, but curiosity is a powerful drug. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to hear if there was any contrition, any awareness of the disaster he had just hosted. I picked up. His voice was hoarse. He sounded exhausted, stripped of his usual influencer bravado. He started by saying he missed me at the wedding. He said it wasn't the same without me. I did not offer him a polite lie. I just said, I am sure the photos looked great. He hesitated. Then came the pivot. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. He said, yeah, it was a crazy night. Look, Bree, things got a little messy with the vendors. You know how it is. Mom said you guys had talked about the lighting gift, and I guess there was a mix-up with the card? I felt my spine stiffen. He was still trying. He was still trying to gaslight me into paying the bill that my father had already swiped for. Or perhaps he was trying to get me to reimburse Dad. I stopped him. I said, there was no mix-up. Logan, I never agreed to pay for the lighting. I never agreed to be a guarantor. And if Mom told you I did, she lied to you. Silence. Then his tone changed. The nice brother mask slipped, and the panic underneath revealed itself. He said, come on, Brianna, do not be like this. I am in a hole here. Sienna is freaking out. Dad is stressed. If you could just help with this one thing, just this one invoice, it would smooth everything over. It is just $3,000. You make that in a week. Just $3,000. I thought about the $100 check. I asked him, did you enjoy Hawaii, Logan? He stammered. He said that was irrelevant. He said that was the past. I told him, it is not the past to me. You prioritized a vacation over my wedding. Now I am prioritizing my financial security over your debt. That is how the real world works. He got angry then. He told me I was cold. He told me I was punishing him. I said, no, Logan, I am simply not rescuing you. There is a difference. I hung up. I sat there, my heart pounding, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I had held the line. But the universe, or perhaps my mother's incompetence, had one more twist waiting for me. An hour later, an email landed in my inbox. It was not from the rental company. It was from a credit monitoring service I had signed up for after the first suspicious call. It was an alert for a new account verification. I opened it. My stomach dropped. It was a confirmation email from a buy now, pay later service. One of those companies that split purchases into 4 payments. The account had been created 2 days ago. The name on the account was Brianna Hale. The address was my parents' house in Florida. But here was the kicker. The email address associated with it was the fake one I had discovered earlier. The only reason I received the alert was that the service had cross-referenced my social security number, which I had foolishly given to my mother years ago for insurance purposes. I clicked through to see the transaction details. There was one pending purchase. It was for $5,000. The merchant was a luxury travel agency. I stared at the screen. They weren't just trying to pay for the wedding. They were trying to book a honeymoon. Logan and Sienna were planning to go to the Maldives, and they were using my credit profile to finance the tickets because their own cards were maxed out. They must have assumed that since I missed the wedding, I wouldn't notice a payment plan notification until it was too late, or that I would be too guilty to press charges once the trip was booked. I felt a coldness settle over me that was sharper than the wind in Telluride. This wasn't just toxic family dynamics anymore. This was a crime. They were stealing from me. They felt so entitled to my resources that they were willing to commit identity theft to get a tan. I picked up the phone. I did not call Logan. I did not call Marjorie. I called the fraud department of the Buy Now, Pay Later service. I spoke clearly and calmly. I told them I did not open the account. I told them the transaction was unauthorized. I told them to flag the account, cancel the purchase, and, this was the part that felt like cutting the cord, I told them I was willing to sign a police affidavit if necessary. The agent on the phone was efficient. She said the transaction was canceled. She said the travel agency would be notified immediately that the payment had failed. I hung up. I looked at the family photo on my computer screen again, the one with the empty space where I should have been. They wanted me to be part of the picture? Fine. I was about to enter the frame, but I wasn't coming as a guest. I wasn't coming as a sister. I was coming as a creditor. I took a screenshot of the fraud alert. I opened a new email draft. I attached the screenshot. I attached the picture of the $100 check. I attached the email from the lighting company. I typed one line in the subject: "The bank is closed." I added Marjorie, Ray, and Logan to the recipient list. I hovered over the send button. This was it. This was the moment I stopped protecting them from their own choices. This was the moment I burned the bridge to light my own way forward. I clicked send. Somewhere in Florida, a notification pinged, and somewhere in a travel agency system, a honeymoon just got canceled. The silence I had maintained was over. It was time for the noise to begin. The morning after I sent the email exposing the fraud, I did not wait for the inevitable explosion. Instead, I made an appointment with a legal consultant. I needed to understand exactly where the line stood between a family dispute and a felony. I met with a man named Mr. Vance in a small, sterile office in downtown Portland. He was a specialist in identity theft and familial financial abuse. I laid out the ledger on his desk: the unauthorized guarantor signature for the lighting rig, the fake email account, and the attempted financing of the honeymoon through the buy now, pay later service. Vance looked over the documents in silence. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He told me that this was textbook. He said that what my brother and mother had done was technically wire fraud and identity theft. He told me I had enough to file a police report that day. I looked at the paperwork. Filing a police report would mean arrest warrants. It would mean Logan losing his job, assuming he still had one. It would mean my parents losing their standing in the community. I told Vance I was not ready to put handcuffs on them. Not yet. I just wanted to stop the bleeding. I wanted to make sure they could never use my name again. He nodded. He suggested a formal cease and desist letter, coupled with a rigorous credit freeze. He drafted the letters right there. They were not emotional. They were legal instruments. They stated that any further use of my name, social security number, or credit profile would result in immediate criminal prosecution. They demanded the removal of my information from any and all accounts they held. We sent copies to my parents, to Logan, and to every financial institution I could think of. Sending those letters felt like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. It hurt, but I knew the alternative was letting the infection kill me. For 34 years, I had been the family's emotional garbage disposal. I was the one who absorbed the anxiety, the one who fixed the mistakes, the one who stayed quiet so they could be loud. I was retiring from that position effective immediately. The reaction arrived 48 hours later. Marjorie did not text. She called. I let it go to voicemail. But she called again immediately, then a third time. I finally picked up, not because I was afraid, but because I needed to deliver the news personally. Her voice was a shriek. She did not say hello. She screamed that I had sent a threatening letter to my own mother. She asked me who I thought I was. She said Logan was sobbing in his kitchen because I was treating him like a criminal over a simple misunderstanding. I spoke over her. My voice was low, devoid of the trembling that used to plague me. I told her that attempting to finance a $5,000 vacation in my name without my consent was not a misunderstanding. I told her it was theft. Marjorie switched tactics instantly. She went for the guilt. She said, "You are going to ruin him, Brianna. He is just starting his marriage. If this gets out, he will lose everything. How can you be so cruel to your own blood?" I felt a strange detachment. I realized she did not care that he had stolen from me. She only cared that I had caught him. I told her, "I am not ruining him. Mom, I am stopping you from ruining me. There is a difference." I told her that if she wanted to protect Logan, she should teach him to pay for his own life. Then I told her that if I saw one more unauthorized inquiry on my credit report, I would hand the file to the district attorney. I hung up. My hands were steady. 2 days later, my father called. Ray never calls just to chat. He calls when Marjorie pushes him to fix things. He calls to broker peace treaties that involve me surrendering territory. His voice was tired. He sounded like an old man. He started with small talk about the weather in Portland, about his golf game. I let him ramble for a minute, waiting for the pivot. Then he sighed. He said, "Your mother is in a bad way. Bree, she has not slept in days. You know how she gets. She just wants everyone to get along." He was doing the thing he always did, asking me to manage her emotions because he was too cowardly to do it himself. He wanted me to apologize, or at least soften my stance, so that she would stop screaming at him in the kitchen. I interrupted him. I told him that I knew he was trying to help, but he was actually part of the problem. He went silent. I told him that by standing by and watching them erase me from the wedding, by watching them use my name for credit, and by saying nothing, he had chosen a side. I told him that silence is an action. He tried to protest. He said, "Brianna, you know I love you. It is just, your mother is difficult. You have to understand her personality." I told him I was done understanding. I told him I had a husband who respected me. I told him I had a career that fulfilled me. And then I laid down the boundary that I knew would haunt him. I said, "Dad, listen to me. Ethan and I are talking about starting a family in the next year or two." I could hear his breath hitch. Ray loves babies. He has always talked about being a grandfather. I continued, "If we have a child, that child will not know people who lie. That child will not be around people who steal. If you want to be a grandfather, you need to decide right now if you're going to be an enabler or a father, because I will not let my children be treated the way you let Mom treat me." He did not speak for a long time. Then he whispered a soft, "Okay," and hung up. I knew he wouldn't change overnight. He was too beaten down by 30 years of Marjorie's tyranny. But for the first time, I had made the cost of his cowardice clear. While I was drawing lines in the sand, Logan's life was washing away. According to cousin Jessica, who had become my unofficial spy, the honeymoon was officially off. The travel agency had canceled the booking after my fraud report. Logan had tried to spin it as a postponement due to work conflicts, but Sienna wasn't stupid. Jessica told me that the mood in their house was toxic. Logan was drowning in the debt from the wedding, the lighting bill, the venue overages, the bar tab. It was all coming due, and because I had closed the Bank of Brianna, he had nowhere to turn. He was dealing with it the only way he knew how: avoidance. He was complaining about his job, saying his boss didn't get his vision. He was talking about needing a weekend trip to Vegas to blow off steam, even though he couldn't pay his rent. Sienna was starting to wake up. Jessica said Sienna had been calling her, crying. Sienna felt alone. She realized that in any dispute, Logan would choose Marjorie. When Sienna suggested they sell Logan's truck to pay off the wedding debt, Marjorie had intervened, screaming that a man needs his truck and that Sienna should pick up extra shifts instead. Logan stood there and let his mother berate his wife. I felt a pang of sympathy for Sienna, but I pushed it down. She had participated in the charade. She had stood in the photos where I was erased. She had to learn her own lessons. Meanwhile, my life at Northline Creative Systems was taking off. While my family was mired in the swamp of their own making, I was given the lead on the biggest campaign of the quarter. It was a national rebranding project for a tech firm. It required focus, precision, and the ability to manage difficult personalities, skills I had unknowingly honed during a lifetime of managing Marjorie. I threw myself into the work. It was satisfying. In the corporate world, when you do a good job, people say thank you. They pay you. They do not ask you to sacrifice your dignity for the good of the company without compensation. One afternoon, my boss, Sarah, called me into her office. She told me she was impressed with my ability to handle crisis management. She offered me a promotion to senior director. It came with a raise that was more than Logan made in a year. I called Ethan to tell him. We went out for dinner to celebrate. We drank expensive wine. We toasted to success. For the first time, my success felt entirely my own. It wasn't something I had to hide to avoid making Logan jealous. It wasn't something I had to downplay so Marjorie wouldn't feel insecure. It was mine. I realized that by cutting the cord, I hadn't just saved my money, I had saved my energy. All those hours I used to spend worrying about them, analyzing their texts, trying to predict their moods, that energy was now flowing into my career and my marriage. I was thriving because I wasn't carrying dead weight. But silence from a narcissist is never permanent. It is just a reloading phase. A few weeks passed without a word from Marjorie. The aunts and uncles were quiet, too, likely processing the rumors about the fraud letters. I began to relax. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had scared them enough to make them leave me alone. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night. I was cleaning up the kitchen after dinner when a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email from Marjorie. The subject line was blank. I opened it. There was no text in the body of the email. There was just an attachment. It was a scanned document, a legal document. I zoomed in. It was a deed to the family lake house, a small, run-down cabin 2 hours outside of Portland that my grandfather had built. It was the only asset my parents truly owned, and it was the only place where I had happy memories as a child. Grandpa had always said he wanted the cabin to stay in the family. He had promised it to me and Logan. I looked at the new deed. It had been notarized yesterday. Marjorie and Ray had transferred the entirety of the property to Logan Hale, sole ownership. And below the scan, Marjorie had finally typed a single sentence. Since you are so concerned with financial independence, we decided to simplify the estate planning. I stared at the screen. This was her counterattack. I had cut off the money, so she was cutting off the inheritance. She was taking the one thing of sentimental value I cared about and handing it to the son who had just tried to rob me. She expected me to call. She expected me to scream. She expected me to beg. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to prove that she still held the keys to my happiness. I looked at Ethan. I showed him the email. He looked furious. He asked if we could fight it. I looked at the deed again. I thought about the cabin. I thought about the leaky roof. I thought about the property taxes. I thought about the memories of summer, swimming in the cold water. Then I thought about the freedom of the last few weeks. I realized that if I fought for the cabin, I would be back in the mud with them. I would be engaging. I would be playing her game. The cabin was the bait, and I was not going to bite. Marjorie had played her final card. She had fired her last cannon. She thought she was punishing me, but she didn't realize that she had just set me free from the last string attaching me to them. I did not reply to the email. I deleted it. But the quiet in the house felt different that night. It wasn't the peace of resolution. It was the heavy, charged silence of a battlefield before the final charge. Marjorie had realized she couldn't control me with guilt, so she tried to hurt me with assets. When she realized that didn't work either, she would have nothing left but pure, unadulterated rage. And a narcissist with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. She was preparing something else. I could feel it. The cabin was just a jab. The haymaker was coming. The invitation for the ambush arrived on a Thursday afternoon. It was not a private text or a phone call. It was a mass email sent to the entire extended family. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, and second cousin within a 50-mile radius. The subject line read, "Healing and Moving Forward." In the body of the email, my mother wrote that the recent misunderstandings and distance had caused too much pain. She claimed that life was too short for grudges and that she wanted to host a family gathering at her house on Sunday to clear the air, share a meal, and make a very special announcement regarding the family's future. I knew exactly what this was. It was a summons to a public execution. Marjorie knew that I had cut off communication. She knew I had blocked her number and returned her emails unopened. She knew she could not bully me one-on-one anymore. So, she was resorting to her favorite weapon, the audience. She was betting that if she put me in a room with 30 relatives, plied them with lasagna and wine, and then sprang a public request on me, The social pressure would force me to capitulate. She thought I would be too polite to say no in front of Grandma's sister. She thought she was setting a trap. She did not realize she was walking into one. I called Aunt Nora immediately. Nora had received the same email. She asked me if I was going to skip it. I told her no. I told her that skipping it would allow Marjorie to spin the narrative. If I wasn't there, she could tell them I was cruel, that I was hysterical, that I had abandoned them. I needed to be there, but I wasn't going to be the victim this time. I asked Nora if she was willing to help me end this. Nora didn't hesitate. She said she had been waiting 30 years for someone to finally stand up to Marjorie. Sunday arrived. The sky was overcast, a flat sheet of gray that matched my mood. Ethan drove. I sat in the passenger seat with a black leather tote bag at my feet. Inside the bag was not a casserole or a bottle of wine. It was a 3-ring binder containing the ledger, printed in high resolution, along with enlarged screenshots of texts, emails, and social media posts, all organized chronologically. We pulled into my parents' driveway. It was packed with cars. The house was already buzzing with noise. When we walked in, the air changed. The chatter in the living room dipped in volume. Heads turned. I saw my cousin Jessica, who gave me a subtle nod. I saw my father, Ray, standing by the fireplace, looking like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. And I saw Logan and Sienna sitting on the sofa, looking sullen and defensive. Marjorie was in the center of the room, holding a glass of wine. When she saw me, her face lit up with a performance of maternal joy that was so bright it was almost blinding. She rushed over, arms open, trying to hug me. I did not hug her back. I sidestepped her, keeping my hands on my bag. I said hello to the room in general and took a seat in the corner, next to Aunt Nora. Ethan stood behind my chair, a silent sentinel. Marjorie recovered quickly. She clapped her hands to gather everyone's attention. She started her speech. She talked about how hard the last year had been. She squeezed out a few tears about how much she loved her children. She talked about the importance of forgiveness. It was a masterclass in vague emotional manipulation. She didn't admit to any specific wrongdoing. She just used words like mistakes on both sides and communication breakdowns. Then came the pivot. She looked at Logan, then she looked at me with a watery, pleading smile. She said, "We all know that Logan has had a tough start to his marriage. The wedding costs were higher than expected, and there have been some financial hurdles. But in this family, we help each other." The room was silent. I could feel the tension rising. Marjorie took a deep breath and delivered the line she had undoubtedly rehearsed in the mirror. She said, "And that is why I am so touched that Brianna has stepped up. We had a long talk, and she has promised to help cover the outstanding debts for the wedding to ensure her brother does not start his life in the red. It is such a generous gift, and I wanted us all to thank her." A murmur went through the room. Several aunts looked at me with surprise and approval. Uncle Bob raised his glass as if to toast. It was a brilliant lie. If I stayed silent, I accepted the debt. If I denied it, I looked like I was reneging on a promise and embarrassing my mother in public. I did not take a sip of wine. I did not look down. I stood up. The room went quiet again. Marjorie was smiling at me, her eyes hard and warning. She expected me to make a polite speech and sit down. I looked directly at her. My voice was calm, clear, and loud enough to reach the back of the room. I asked, "When did I promise that, Mom?" Marjorie's smile faltered. She laughed nervously. She said, "Oh, honey, don't be shy. We know you are humble." I cut her off. "No, I am asking you a specific question. On what date, at what time, and via what medium did I promise to pay for Logan's wedding? Was it in a text, an email, a phone call?" Marjorie's face flushed. She stammered, "Well, we discussed it. You know we did." I opened my bag. I pulled out the binder. I said, "That is interesting, because the last time we spoke, I told you I would not be attending the wedding, and the time before that, I sent a cease and desist letter to stop you from using my name to commit fraud." The word fraud hung in the air like smoke. Marjorie panicked. She tried to rush toward me. She shouted, "Brianna, stop this! How dare you speak to me like that? I gave birth to you. I sacrificed everything for you." She was trying to use the noise to drown out the facts, but she had forgotten about Aunt Nora. Nora stood up. She was holding her iPad, which was connected to the large smart TV on the wall, the one Ray used to watch football. Marjorie hadn't noticed Nora connecting it when we walked in. Nora tapped the screen. Suddenly, the TV displayed a split-screen image. On the left was the date of my wedding. On the right was the family reset photo of my parents and Logan in Hawaii, taken on that exact same day. Nora spoke. Her voice was dry and sharp. She said, "Since we are talking about sacrifices, let's look at the timeline. Here is Marjorie and Ray sacrificing Brianna's wedding for a discount vacation." The room gasped. Some of the relatives who had believed Marjorie's lie about me being stuck at work stared at the screen. Marjorie screamed at Ray to turn off the TV, but Ray was frozen. I stepped forward. I held up a printout of the email from the lighting company. I said, "And here's the contract for the lighting rig at Logan's wedding. You will notice the signature at the bottom says, Brianna Hale. But if you look at the email address used, it is a fake account made by my mother. This is why the lights went out. Everyone, I didn't pay the bill because I never signed the contract. They forged my signature." I flipped the page. I held up the fraud alert from the Buy Now, Pay Later service. I said, "And this is from last week. An attempt to finance a $5,000 honeymoon to the Maldives in my name. I had to file a police report to stop it." I looked around the room. The expressions on the faces of my relatives had shifted from confusion to horror. They weren't looking at me as the villain anymore. They were looking at Marjorie and Logan like they were strangers. Cousin David, the accountant, stood up. He looked at Marjorie. He asked, "Is this true? Did you really use her social security number without asking?" Marjorie was shaking. Her plan had backfired spectacularly. She had brought everyone here to witness my submission, but instead, she had given them front-row seats to her corruption. She tried one last desperate defense. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She screamed, "She is lying. She is jealous of her brother. She has always been jealous because Logan needs more help than she does. She is rich. She has a big job. Why shouldn't she help family?" It was a confession wrapped in an accusation. She was admitting that she felt entitled to my money because I was successful. Then, the room turned its attention to Logan. Logan had been sitting silently, his face pale, but as the walls closed in, the pressure cracked him. He stood up, knocking his wine glass over. The red liquid stained the white carpet, spreading like a wound. He looked at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. He didn't deny the theft. He didn't deny the forgery. He shouted the quiet part out loud. He yelled, "Because you always fix it. That is why. You always complain. But you always pay. You are the older sister. It is your job. You were supposed to just let it go." The silence that followed was absolute. Logan had just admitted that he didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a function. He believed that my role in the universe was to yield, to pay, and to suffer so that he could be comfortable. He believed that my resistance was a glitch in the system, not a valid boundary. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat on a beach while I got married. I looked at the man who had tried to steal my credit rating for a honeymoon. I said, very softly, "I am not your safety net, Logan, and I am not your bank. The only thing I am to you now is a stranger." Sienna, who had been sitting next to him, slowly stood up. She looked at Logan. She looked at the red stain on the carpet. She looked at Marjorie, who was now sobbing into her hands. Sienna said, "You told me she offered. You told me the money was a gift." Logan turned to her, desperate. "Babe, it doesn't matter. We can fix it." Sienna shook her head. She backed away from him. She said, "You stole from your sister." The meeting was over. There was no announcement. There was no meal. I closed my binder. I signaled to Ethan. We turned around and walked toward the door. Marjorie shouted something unintelligible after me. But nobody moved to stop us. The family, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, parted like the Red Sea to let us pass. They didn't say a word, but their eyes said enough. They knew the truth now. The illusion of the perfect Hale family was shattered, and the shards were lying all over Marjorie's living room floor. The silence in the living room was not the quiet of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum after an explosion. Logan's confession, that he believed it was my job to pay for his mistakes, hung in the air, stripping away the last veneer of family unity. Marjorie was the first to move. She did not step toward her son to comfort him. She stepped toward me. Her face twisted into a mask of tragic victimhood. She looked at the relatives, then at me, and her voice trembled with a weaponized sorrow. She asked how I could be so cold. She asked how I could stand there and watch my family bleed. I looked at her. For 34 years, her tears had been my command. When she cried, I folded. When she sighed, I apologized. But looking at her now, I realized those tears were not for me. They were for herself. They were the tears of a puppeteer whose strings had been cut. I spoke clearly, my voice steady enough to reach every corner of the room. I told her, I do not hate you, Mom. She blinked, surprised by the lack of venom. I continued. I told her that hate would imply passion, and I did not have that left for her. I told her that I hated the way she had conditioned me. I hated that she had raised me to believe that my only purpose was to be the fuel that kept the rest of the family warm. I hated that she turned my love into a currency and my boundaries into a betrayal. I turned to the room. I looked at the aunts who had whispered about me. I looked at the cousins who had liked the family reset photo. I announced that I was done playing the game. I told them that for years. I had participated in the lie to save face. I had smiled when I was hurt. I had stayed silent when I was erased. But the price of admission to this family was my dignity, and I was no longer willing to pay it. I looked back at my parents. I gave them the terms of my surrender. I told them that if they ever wanted to see me again, if they ever wanted to know their future grandchildren, there was a cost. I told them they had to admit the truth. Not a vague apology for misunderstandings. I needed them to say the words. I needed them to admit they chose a vacation in Hawaii over my wedding. I needed them to admit they lied to the family to cover it up. And I needed them to admit they tried to use my credit to fund their fantasy life. My father, Ray, stepped forward. He looked old and defeated. He reached a hand out, hovering in the air between us. He said, Brianna, please, we are sorry things got this far. Your mother is just... She loves hard. Can we just put this behind us? We are sorry you feel hurt. I looked at his hand. I did not take it. I told him that was not an apology. I told him that saying, sorry you feel hurt, is just another way of saying you are too sensitive. I told him I did not need him to manage the peace. I needed him to manage the truth. I needed him to acknowledge reality. And if he could not do that because he was too afraid of his wife, then he could not be a father to me. Marjorie saw Ray falter. She saw the relatives looking at their shoes, shifting uncomfortably. She realized she was losing the room. She screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound. She shouted that I was shaming the family. She pointed at the door and yelled that I was trying to destroy them all because I was bitter. She looked at her sister, Nora, expecting an ally. But Nora stepped back. It was a small movement, but it was an earthquake. Nora took a physical step away from Marjorie. Then Uncle Bob took a step back. Then Cousin David. Nobody came to Marjorie's side. Nobody told me to calm down. For the first time, the audience she had curated was walking out of the theater. They had seen the receipts. They had seen the fraud alert. They knew that no amount of crying could wash away the fact that she had tried to steal from her own daughter. Logan, seeing his mother's power collapse, panicked. He was still standing by the red wine stain, looking like a child who had broken a vase. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. The anger was gone, replaced by pure terror. He said, Bree, please, I am drowning. The vendors are calling. The venue is threatening to sue. I can't make rent next month. I need help. Just this once. I promise I will pay you back." He looked so pathetic. Part of me, the old part, wanted to write the check. It would be so easy to fix it. It would be so easy to be the hero. But I looked at Ethan, who was standing beside me, solid and unmoving. I remembered the $100 check. I remembered the empty chair. I looked at Logan. I told him that helping him now would be the worst thing I could do. I told him that he had spent 29 years being shielded from consequences, and that was why he thought it was okay to commit identity theft. I told him, "I need you to grow up. Logan, I do not need a dependent, and you do not need a savior. You need to learn how to fall." I turned to leave. But before I could reach the door, a voice stopped me. It was Sienna. She had been standing quietly near the window, watching the destruction of the Hale dynasty. She walked to the center of the room. She looked different. The deferential, eager-to-please girl I had met a year ago was gone. She looked at Marjorie, then she looked at the family. She said, "I want to say something." Marjorie tried to shush her. She told Sienna not to make it worse. Sienna ignored her. She spoke to the room. She said that for months. She had felt like she was going crazy. She said Marjorie had directed every single moment of the wedding, down to the angle of the photos. Sienna looked at me. She said, "She made us stand to the right, in the group photos. She told the photographer to leave a gap on the left. She said, 'Leave space so people ask where Brianna is.' She wanted people to ask. She wanted the visual gap so she could tell the story of how you abandoned us." A gasp went through the room. It was one thing to be absent. It was another thing to choreograph the absence for maximum dramatic effect. Sienna continued. She said she was tired of the lies. She admitted that she knew about the money troubles. But Logan kept telling her that Brianna promised to fix it. She looked at Logan with disgust. She said she was done being a prop in their family pageant. Marjorie stood frozen. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her army had mutinied. Her son was exposed. Her daughter-in-law had turned witness, and her daughter, the scapegoat, was standing tall. She looked around the room, waiting for someone to defend her, but the silence stretched on, heavy and final. Nobody feared her anymore. The monster under the bed was just a sad, manipulative woman standing on a wine-stained carpet. I felt a sense of lightness that I can only describe as gravity releasing its hold. The war was over. I hadn't fired a shot. I had just turned on the lights. I took Ethan's hand. I nodded to Aunt Nora, who picked up her purse and walked over to join us. We walked to the door. Marjorie found her voice one last time. It was a whisper, weak and broken. She said, "If you walk out that door, do not expect to come back." I stopped. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her face to know she was still trying to set a trap that no longer existed. I said, "Not this time, not ever again." I opened the door and walked out into the cool, gray afternoon. The air smelled of rain and pine needles. It smelled of reality. We got into the car. Ethan, Nora, and I, as we drove away, I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the window where I knew she was watching. The months that followed were quiet. The phone did not ring. The flying monkeys did not attack. The silence I had enforced was finally respected, not out of courtesy, but out of fear. They knew now that I had the receipts, and they knew I wasn't afraid to use them. I heard through the grapevine that Logan and Sienna separated 3 months later. The debt was too much, and the trust was gone. Logan had to move back in with our parents. I imagine that house is a miserable place now, filled with 3 people who blame the world for their problems, trapped in a cycle of their own making. I did not celebrate their downfall. I simply moved on. I focused on my career. I focused on Ethan. We bought a new house, one with a guest room for Aunt Nora, who comes to visit often. We hosted Thanksgiving that year. The table was full. Cousin Jessica came. Cousin David came. Friends from work came. There were no empty chairs. There were no guilt trips. There was just food and laughter and the easy, uncomplicated love of people who choose to be there. I realized then that revenge isn't about making the other person suffer. That is a waste of energy. Revenge, real, deep, lasting revenge, is refusing to let them define your worth. It is building a life so full and so vibrant that their absence isn't a hole, but a relief. I won, not because I destroyed them, but because I stopped letting them destroy me. I drew a line, I held it, and I finally, truly lived. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and let me know which part of the world you are in. And tell me if you have ever had to draw a hard line with your own family. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and give the video a hype so we can share this journey with even more people.